Here's our prompts for today, guys. Make a superhero from the 1940s with enhanced strength. Have them be a superhero or soldier in the past life with a fallen best friend. Imagine that character traveling decades into the future through some means, being forced to confront that friend that supposedly died in combat, and have them find love in the future before inevitably traveling back to live the life they always wanted. Got that idea in mind? Now, make her hot. Like, make you question your sexuality hot. Gal Gadot, but with more personality. So based on that riveting explanation, this character is very original, by a rocky technicality. Hey guys, I'm V for Verbatim, and today I think I created a woke monstrosity that ticks all of the diversity boxes. She's a woman. She's mixed race. She's queer. She's an escapee from a labor camp. We'll get into that in a bit, but today, my friends, we're going to be getting into the second OC I ever made. She's alongside Azabeth Black as one of the original 8 members of the Heroes Rising cast, the first story I ever made. She's also one of the few characters in this story with no superpowers and a more mellowed out personality, despite all the angsty drama she's involved in. But in all seriousness, I find her interesting because while in a lot of ways, she and I have very similar backgrounds, but as you'll see soon, she's not a character that I personally relate to all that much. In terms of story beats that matter, which I would like to make a statement here saying that just because a character is similar to you on the basis of aesthetics and cultural elements like race, gender, sexuality, religion, all that census jazz, doesn't mean you're obligated to relate to them. That might be a video for another day, honestly, but with that oddly placed segue out of the way, this is your warning now. This video gets a little heavier than Azabeth's, and we will be touching on topics such as the war, PTSD, loss, internalized and externalized homophobia, and if you're not comfortable with that, there's no shame in leaving now. There's your warning, guys. So now let's get into a video that definitely would have been demonetized if my channel was monetized at all. Let's go ahead and talk about Becky Adams, the first modern superhero.
Hey y'all, if you notice that I sound a little bit different, I may have adjusted the way that I'm sitting after loading the rest of the script onto my laptop, because for some reason it wasn't loading, and if this helps you understand why that took so long, the script for Azabeth and for Becky comes out to be 14 pages together, so it's kind of long. So I apologize if it sounds weird at points. It's the beginning part and the end part were just not loading, so that might sound a little weird in post or when you guys actually get to watch it. So, my bad. Let's continue.
Becky Adams, or Commander Eagle, is a lot easier to follow compared to Azabeth from the past video. She was created in 2012, or more accurately her costume was. Originally, she had a masquerade-style mask with white feathers and a red cape, which I stuck with for about 5 years too long, unfortunately. There isn't much variation between designs other than placement of stars and stripes for a while. Her power set has also changed some, like Azabeth's. She started out as a girl with gained super strength from some kind of chemical, and she had a catchphrase to go with her cringe-inducing backstory. This is just too easy. And I don't think I need to explain why that changed. By the time I hit middle school, I expanded her character like the barest, tiniest bit. There was this really short, unfinished comic where she suffers from a head injury during a battle with a villain and loses all her memories. And the reason for it was because she had lost a friend in battle before and sustained a similar injury without getting it treated. So there was a dent in her head that made her susceptible to worse head trauma. That's when I decided that she was a soldier from World War II that traveled to the future to join the team she and Azabeth were on. Around that time was when I decided to make her a team leader and establish that Cassidy Joyce and Becky Adams had a close friendship. By high school, she was still more boring than buttered pasta, so with things swapped around a little, she went from just a World War II soldier to the first ever documented superhero, which is why Cassidy sought her out for the team. We'll get into her story in a minute, but her design was also expanded on too, with more shape and style to her uniform than before since, I will admit I just found it more attractive with the sleeveless high neck look. I'm sorry, but dark-haired characters are my weakness and I got carried away. If it wasn't obvious, Becky is the most directly inspired by an actual superhero. She's kind of a reskin of Captain America and Bucky Barnes with a coat of Wonder Woman paint, which makes a lot of sense since the periods that I developed her were a stone's throw from the release of each film. For her story, I'm going to be describing a combination of her original story and rewrites to distinguish her from her inspiration. Before Season 1, Becky Adams, nicknamed Corporal Condor then, was a soldier as early as age 14, having falsely documented her age when she was enlisted. She was able to get away with this mostly because she was an orphan during the Great Depression and she didn't have a lot of documentation to her name, just a handmade blanket that she had been wrapped in, the only physical connection she has to her Native American roots. She lived on the streets for the majority of her life and taught herself through any books she could get her hands on. She was raised by some of the more generous among the poverty-stricken residents of Chicago Hoovervilles, but her closest friend and mentor was a fellow Algonquin man named Wemiton. He would go on to join Becky on the outskirts of Germany when she traveled overseas as a stowaway, planning to join the war efforts despite her age and country's neutrality at the time, since it was 1940. The group they joined called themselves the Phoenix Battalion, which will be slightly important in a second. She befriended a fellow trainee, a British sniper named John Watson, and they initially became infatuated with each other while nerding out about the Sherlock Holmes series. Together with Wemiton, the three served in many battles and were responsible for leading in the evacuation of several notable Nazi death and labor camps, the most dangerous of which was an operation into Auschwitz itself, where Becky had to enter the camp from the outside. In order to survive the initial gassing of the people she arrived with, she disguised herself as a gay man and was kept alive for experimental purposes. She suffered alongside the rest of the inmates for several days without being found out, being tagged along with everybody else, being exposed to poor hygiene conditions, and once she was found out, being forced to sleep outside and take ice-cold showers in the middle of a German winter. Becky had to take a break from the war efforts for a month with John and Wemiton caring for her and the other escapees, since many, including her, had contracted an illness in the camp. In the latter half of the war, they entered their final battle together. Becky was nearly killed by an oncoming grenade when she froze up at the sight of civilians, reminding her of her time at the labor camp. But Wemiton and John intercepted the path of travel in an attempt to smother the explosive, an unsuccessful attempt that killed both of them. Becky survived as the first modern superhero in recorded history, but the blood of her two dearest friends was on her hands and that title was forever stained in her eyes. In honor of them, she took on John's nickname in combat, Eagle. She goes through some heavy contemplative shit before Cassidy meets her with an offer to take her to the future, an off-screen event at the start of Season 1. Becky starts out Season 1 as the last character introduced to the original team of 8 when they all meet for the first time, but she's recognized immediately by half of them. Becky's legacy as a hero continued a century later, when heroics became a more modern pop star equivalent. She spends most of Season 1 as a character for the audience to project onto as she's taught about how the world works by the leader of the team, Cassidy Joyce. She's shown to have a big heart and a dedication to excellence in her team. She tries to lead as best she can, but given her lack of familiarity with the time period, she leans on Alexa Agrath and Cassidy for support and occasionally validation. She leads the team into all 3 mini-arcs of the season through her detective work, and while Alexa and Becky become close friends, there's no sign of the later seasons of the romantic development between them. From Becky's end, at least. Her most notable episodes for Season 1 are Mirrors, an episode where her post-war trauma and loss causes the others to question her ability to effectively lead the team, Downward Spiral, her first character-focused episode where she struggles to connect with the rest of the team due to her background, and Escape from Max Labs Part 1 and Part 2, where she leads the team against Cassidy's wishes to rescue someone close to Cassidy from Max Astral, and realizes her loyalty to her closest friend is often her weakness. She got the most plot-related episodes in Season 1, hell, she even got to be part of a time travel mini-arc. But her centrality in the season is less the case in Season 2. Becky takes a back seat during the majority of Season 2, but she still struggles to be a leader this season as she starts to doubt herself and her own feelings. This is where Becky's past and future really come into conflict. First of all, the Frost and Fire arc. Cassidy, feeling bad about how she reacted to Becky's attempts to help her at the end of Season 1, is a motivation for her to hand Becky the reins for an important MacGuffin mission. Becky struggles to lead the team here since there's so much pressure put on her and the team mostly doesn't trust her after her last failed mission. But she proves to be an excellent leader in the latter half of the 2-episode mini-arc. She begins to lead more missions after this point. Her next major episode is Episode 20, Dead Man Walking, when her fallen lover John Watson returns as a villain to torment her. He ultimately dies, with hints at that version simply being a copy of the already deceased original version. So John is truly gone at this point. Her last big episode is Circle Talk, which follows a lapse of judgment from Alexa when she kisses Becky. The two ignore the elephant in the room during the entire episode while trying and failing to come together to defeat a villain that trapped them in a convenience store. Alexa tries to talk through it in metaphors and similes and symbols, and tries to convince Becky that they both have feelings for each other, while Becky completely dodges any sort of conversation given her internalized homophobia and previous male lover. They reconcile during the episode, but no relationship comes into play during the season, given the events that distract from it at the end of the season, including murder, a corrupt deity twist villain, and even more murder. In Season 3, Becky is separated from all of her closest allies. Alexa and Robin are in space, Cassidy's kidnapped, and John and Wemington are long gone. For the third season of the show, I would have it so Becky is forced to create new connections outside of her immediate safety net, and use that connection to finally lead without somebody else to turn to. Her goal? To rescue Cassidy from a villain organization called Phoenix. Becky takes on the task of infiltrating the organization as a student at their academy, which is actually a repeat of her past life, since the Phoenix Battalion she was part of in her past became the Phoenix villain organization she has to infiltrate in the present. It's this whole good and evil are two sides of the same coin spiel. Her team is actually made up of the team members with the murkiest pasts. Azuba, who comes across as very villainous at times, Tesla, who was a villain before she became a hero, Olivia, who also had kind of a dark past and created this mind control tech, and Katie, who had her mind controlled by villains for part of Season 2. So she has to unlearn how to be a hero from them so that they can fit in with the members of the Villain Academy. Becky really learns to loosen up over the course of Season 3, and by the end of the season, Alexa and Becky return to each other and discuss their relationship moving forward, with a greater sense of honesty. In Season 4, Becky is officially a background character, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. She takes the spotlight much less often, and in that 12-year gap between Season 3 and 4, she and Alexa got married and relationship drama is no longer the driving force behind their stories. Actually, it's the matter of retiring that's really on their minds, since Becky has been a soldier and a superhero for 20 years and wants to settle into a life outside her hero persona. The two agree that retiring is a good option, but it then becomes a matter of whether they should stay in the present or Becky should return to the past, since not returning her to her own time would cause time anomaly issues. Becky does everything in her power to convince Alexa to live out her life in the 2050s, but after the death of Azuba Black, Alexa becomes set on going back to the 1950s with Becky. After years of being a leader and making sacrifices for the sake of her loyalties, Becky finally accepts Alexa's offer of loyalty to her and retires from her role as team leader. Becky and Alexa Adams live out their lives as very close sisters in the public eye of 1950s America, but they go on to foster an entire bloodline of heroes, including 2 team leaders in later stories. Becky Adams is 19 years old at the start of the series. She ends the series at age 34. She's 6'1" and 100% human, with her family roots being 50% Algonquin, 50% white. She has no knowledge of her original family, but she does consider Wemington her father figure. Fun fact about her and her design: her mask has been an on and off accessory for her design over the past few years, but I decided to include a scene of her wearing the original feathered Victorian mask in a time travel episode as a nod to her character's history. And the mask is still canon in an alternate timeline, so there's that. Her birthday is July 4th, 1926. She's a cisgender female and her sexuality is a bit more complicated. She's a fundamental Christian, so because of her internalized homophobia, she refused to acknowledge her feelings for women until much later in life. If I were forced to give her a category, I'd say she's pan-romantic, happy pursuing romance with someone regardless of gender once she's comfortable with that idea, but without really getting into it much. She is still a lesbian and only has sexual attraction for women. Her first language is English, but Wemington taught her basic Algonquin phrases, and she learned to speak German and a bit of Dutch during the war. Cassidy was Becky's first friend in the future, and she remains her best friend throughout the series. They've both been through things that have caused them to mature far beyond their years, and often they're the only people they confide in about the trauma from their pasts. Becky holds Cassidy in such a high regard that whenever they don't agree on things, her entire worldview is just completely shaken up. She's stubborn in her beliefs just like Cassidy, so the two tend to argue over these points until one of them agrees with the other. She goes out of her way to make sure Cassidy's okay, and has even done things that have gotten her and others in harm's way, just because of how much she values Cassidy's well-being, including the whole fiasco at the end of Season 1 where she gets the entire team captured so that she can save somebody that Cassidy cared about. Their bond is so strong that had they been closer in age, they probably would have been prime shipping fuel for me, but I want to make it very clear that the two are just bitterly loyal friends and they've both been hurt a lot and find comfort in each other. Alexa eventually becomes Becky's wife, but it takes a long time for them to get there. Becky is initially fond of Alexa because of how well-read Alexa is about her accomplishments, and she appreciates her fangirly attitude around Becky. The two bond over their love of nature and good sense when it comes to tracking animals and humanely trapping and releasing them. On many occasions, Alexa stands by Becky when Cassidy doesn't, and Becky is usually in support of Alexa when she isn't being backed up by anyone else. Their healthy adoration for each other evolves into love over the course of the series, and they eventually reach the point of emotional honesty and later marriage despite Becky's background and initial ideology being so homophobic. Becky's love for John was different than her love for Alexa, being mostly rooted in infatuation and playful, platonic kind of love. She found John's personality as an intellectual and an equal to be quite attractive, but she wasn't interested in physical closeness other than as something more platonic like a best friend. His death haunts her constantly, and when a clone of him blames her for his death, it hits her hard because he claims that she didn't love him when that wasn't true at all. It's a different kind of love, but Becky viewed John as an ally, a friend, and a lover in a different non-sexual sense. Wemington again was a father figure for her, and a model for the way that she would act later in life and in the series. He was the father of her heritage, being the one to explain their past and their history, and he was a guide for her when they fought in the war together. She didn't know this, but before his death, he was experiencing the early symptoms of tuberculosis. So while his death shattered her worse than even John's did because of how long they had known each other, it wasn't as drawn out as it would have been had he survived. Robin and Becky are admittedly an interesting pair. They initially didn't have much in common other than both of them being street kids. Robin, being such a pessimist, didn't jive well with Becky's blind optimism, so they didn't enjoy each other's company that much. Not to mention the fact that Robin's openly bisexual and his sister is trans. His background is everything a fundamental Christian like Becky is told to avoid, but the two end up trapped in a time travel arc together, and they do bond over their less than ideal upbringings, and they learn a lot about each other when they're sent into each other's pasts. They remain friendly with each other after this event, Robin valuing Becky for her hardworking attitude, and Becky appreciating Robin for his intellect and calming personality. It's the first instance where Becky really accepts a queer person as a close friend, and that evolves into her changing attitude that allows her to accept the love of her life. I'd say Robin probably would have been Becky's choice for best man at her wedding, but Alexa has a brother, so unfortunately that wouldn't work out. Becky's pretty vanilla standard superhero fare, but she does have her quirks. She goes to extreme lengths to maintain the peace in her team, in one instance suggesting setting things on fire as a bonding exercise. She's also very old-fashioned, so when she gives advice it's often rooted in 1940s formality, which can be taken well or poorly depending on the situation. She also has this whole spiel where she talks about what a hero would do in any given situation. Though that little quirk about her is only ever used in heroic-based situations in the actual show, I imagine she might consider what a hero would do in trivial situations as well, like when deciding whether to add fries to an order or what time she should set an alarm to. Her role in the story changes over the course of the show constantly, but she's mostly a leader and guide for the other characters. In Season 1, she's looked up to and idolized for her past despite being primarily a surrogate character for the audience that's learning to adapt to a new culture. So basically, she starts out as an isekai protagonist. Seasons 3 and 4 are when Becky's goodness is put into question because of her past connections to a villain organization. But it's ultimately realized that Becky is really just a hero of war rather than a modern hero. And with Becky and the others as an example, the team creates a new definition for heroes that better fits with the times they're currently living in. As Wemington was her guardian, Becky too becomes a guardian and example for her team, and she does everything in her power to keep her family safe this time around. Which works out for 13 out of 14 of the team members. Thoughts and prayers for Azabeth Black, I guess. Becky's not as colorful with her dialogue as Azabeth was. I took a few of her lines and spiced them up to make them sound a bit more 1940s-ish with the speech and all, but keep in mind she adjusts how she speaks to match with the time period more. Becky Adams is a character set in the stone of her Steve Rogers inspiration, but because of her time period, I was able to take her story down a different path. I actually went to the Holocaust Museum in DC since I was visiting the area, and maybe this isn't exactly tactful, but I learned so much, and it was such an interesting experience that I really wanted to incorporate it into Becky Adams' story. Again, not the most tactful thing to do, so I apologize. She was always connected to Nazis World War II, and yes, even the camps in the early phases of her story, but considering her trauma during the war is brought up quite a bit across her seasonal arcs, her infiltrating a labor camp herself and experiencing what millions had to experience and fall to felt like a natural extension of that admittedly small footnote in her story. Experiencing such things just, to me, seems like the natural reason behind her quick adapting to the future, her demonization of the queer community, her desperate desire to keep up team morale as if everything will fall apart if they don't stand together. That all just feels like characterization that would originate from dangerous situations seen at the camps. So as dark as her story goes from this point onward, that element is probably going to stay from now on, even if everything else changes over the course of this massive story rewrite. Either way, here's my queen, Becky Adams, a little less Wonder Woman and Captain America, and I guess this time a little bit more Hamilton. I did not throw away my shot. But that's where I'm going to leave it for you guys. This is Viva Verbatim signing off. Take care and be excellent to each other. Bye.